Now on release in Australian cinemas is a film called Beast of War, and it's my great pleasure to be speaking to the writer-director of the film Beast of War, Kiah Roache-Turner. Kiah, welcome to Movie Metropolis.
It's great to be here again, Peter. I always enjoy these chats, and I'm very excited to be talking about this one. This was a bit of a special one for me. So, yeah.
Well, it's a very impressive film. I was quite knocked out by the approach you took to the film. Tell me about the origins of the story and of the film.
Well, in a way, it's got quite humble and standard origins. The original origin was I just got a phone call from my producer, Blake Northfield, and he rang me up and he goes, "Have you got anything set on water?" And I'm like, "No, why?" And he goes, "I've got access to a tank. Could you write something set on water?" And I'm like, well, "That sounds like a shark film." And he goes, "Shark film, great. I'll call you in a month." And sometimes that's just how movies are made. You know? But then when I started to think about it, I'm like, look, if I'm going to do a shark film, I better not embarrass myself in the shadow of Spielberg. I better pull this off. Um, Obviously, I think one of my favorite moments in Jaws is the brilliant USS Indianapolis monologue by Quint. And I think a lot of cinephiles and cinema nerds have been waiting for somebody to make that film, in the style of Spielberg, a real adventure yarn based on that kind of, it's almost like the rhyme of the ancient mariner, the way he talks about the shark rolling over with its black doll's eyes. And it was such a wonderful speech. And so I was kind of looking around for something in that kind of world in an Australian context, and I very quickly stumbled across, the real life story of the HMAS Armidale that was sunk by Japanese Zeros in 1942, halfway between Darwin and Timor, and hundreds of Australian soldiers went in the ocean, and a lot of them were eaten by sharks, and some of them were just never seen again. Some of them made it back to Darwin by jerry rigging a motorboat they fixed the motor, and then they sort of got close to shore back to Australia and were picked up. And I just thought that was such an interesting shark tale where you can mix, the tragedy and violence of war with, also facing off against, this horrific sea beast. That really was the inspiration for this. So it wasn't based on that. I think it would be disrespectful to make an adventure yarn based on what those, young Australian soldiers actually had to go through. But I was certainly inspired by a lot of the elements of that story. So it was really great to be able to use inspiration from the real world in what is effectively a genre film. But also, from a personal point of view, my grandfather was killed in World War II in Papua New Guinea. So my mother grew up without a father. And during my research, I was able to go through his war letters and see that he was a real charismatic, true hero and a leader of men and a funny guy and a good bloke. And he's just a teacher too. So he's just a normal guy in unusual circumstances. And he died pretty heroically. And, a lot of the character of that man, Jim Roach, who the film is actually dedicated to, went into the lead character of Leo, played by Mark Cole-Smith.
Uh-huh. Oh, how interesting to hear that backstory and how that all came about. Um, Tell me about the issues you had with writing the screenplay because you set up this group of men, these soldiers who are on a boot camp, all that sort of thing, setting up their characters and then morphing into the problems that they encounter later on. Was that a difficult process, or how did you go with that writing?
The first draft just wrote like butter. It's not one of the easiest things I've ever written. It just came out of me. I was like, "Yep, this is so easy." The basic structure, the set pieces, like everything, it just came out very quickly and very easily. The hard part was when we wanted to start massaging, the character arcs and the emotional journeys. My first draft certainly had an Indigenous element. Uh, I wrote the lead part of Leo for Mark Cole-Smith specifically. But I sort of got to the end of the first draft, and my producer took me aside and just went, "Man, you've kind of avoided the racism," which I had done because it made me feel uncomfortable. But I had to go to an uncomfortable place and go back and do a draft that really took into account, the racism of Australia in those days. And I had to write some words that I was uncomfortable with writing, and I had to just do a bit of research, and you find out that Indigenous soldiers were paid like a third of what white blokes were paid, and I just couldn't believe that. So all of that stuff went into the second draft, and we needed to strengthen, the role of Leo emotionally, and we needed to connect him to the shark. So it was in a later draft that we decided that this man would be a fisherman who, years earlier, you see in flashbacks, was fishing off the coast of Broome, where there are a lot of great white sharks, and he loses his younger brother to a shark attack, and so he's carrying the guilt of that with him. And so when he kind of connects into this young soldier and bonds with him, he sort of takes on an older brother kind of uh, relationship with him, and he sort of feels in a way that if he can save this young man from this shark, then maybe he can get over the guilt of losing his brother, earlier on. And a lot of this stuff came in later drafts, so I think the basic structure of it came very easily. But then the colouring in and the deepening of the characters, that occurred, over many drafts, and me and the producers and the distributors and everybody really worked hard on making sure that all that stuff was in there.
Okay, no, fair enough. I'm interested in casting of Mark Cole Smith. I mean, he's excellent in the film, but also all the other young men who are in the film, because I hadn't seen most of them before. How did you go about doing all that?
Well, I didn't cast Mark. I wrote it for him and just prayed that he would say yes. So I've been wanting to work with him for years. I think he's one of the best actors ever. I think he's got like a Robert Mitchum kind of charisma. He's a star, and he's a man of brilliant craft and personal integrity, and he really does embody like a heroic character in a realistic and sort of dynamic way. And he can swim really well, and he does all his own stunts, and he's disgustingly good looking. So kind of if he didn't say yes, I would have been in trouble. Thank God he said yes.
Yeah.
The rest of the blokes, most of them were pretty easy. Like me and Blake, know a lot of really, really insanely talented Australian actors, and so we just kind of picked from our family of people that we've been working with, for the last, few films. So a lot of them were pretty easy to cast, to be honest. The young bloke, Will, played by Joel Nankervis, was very difficult to cast. He needed to have kind of a perfect storm of a lot of boxes to tick. He needed, first of all, to look 17, which is very hard to find somebody who looks 17 and is a good actor. He needed to have vulnerability, intelligence, humor. He needed to be able to start as somebody who's incredibly scared, and he needs to be able to perform an arc where he turns from a boy into a man. So he needed to have the potential of heroism. And so that's a lot of boxes you got to tick. And Joel was the only one who really ticked them all. During that process, we came across Lee Tiger Halley, who's an insanely talented young man. His performance in Boy Swallows Universe was really exciting. And we looked at him for Will, but he wasn't quite Will. He like Will needed to have a nerdy quality that Lee just doesn't have. Like you have to believe that Will could know things about. I mean, this is a guy who reads military manuals. Like about Japanese Zeros. It's like he's a nerd. He's a 1940s nerd, and Lee just, Lee's a bloke. And so, but it was very important for us to have Lee in there somewhere. So he was cast as the other young guy, Teddy. And it was exciting to work with him. He's just he's got a great look. He looks like this angelic young man who, so many of these young Australians died at 17 years of age. They were too young to go to war, and that was part of the tragedy of this historical story that we wanted to tell.
Okay, interesting to hear all that. And tell me about the casting of the shark.
Well, it was a long process. We looked at sharks from all over the world. I mean, audition tapes came in from Africa, and no, we built that particular actor. It took, I think, about 4.5 months for the team at Formation Effects to create that thing, and it was a whole process. It was very important for me to have a practical shark. I have seen a lot of shark movies in the last 10, 20 years, and they're all digital and none of it looks real. It just looks like a really well-rendered video game. The thing that like CGI just can't really quite, even now, it can't quite get right is the weight of the creature in the water. This thing weighs half a ton, and all this water displacement and explosions of waves of water when it, jumps out at people and really interacts with the actors. You can't kind of get that with CGI. CGI looks really dynamic and sexy and cool, but it doesn't really look real in the context of sharks. And so it was very important for us to build an animatronic puppet. So we Formation Effects built this giant puppet head that could be controlled by a stunt diver, and that's the one that just kind of he controls the jaws himself, quite easy to operate. And then they built a giant sort of submersible submarine fin, just this huge fin that's sitting on this huge submarine-like thing that can go down or come up. And it was important to have that for the fin sequences, because when a fin cuts through water, you need to feel the weight of this thing that basically weighs, the same as a bus. It's not about the fin, it's about the weight of the thing under the fin, because you get those big rolling waves as it moves through the water. So we were towing this giant kind of submersible through the tank.
Uh-huh.
And then, the last piece was the hardest and most expensive and most difficult piece was what we called the attack head. So it was the whole front end of the shark. And it's got like these animatronic jaws that can snap. And it operates on rails under the water along the bottom of the tank, and it kind of bursts up out of the water and launches itself at the actors. Yeah, again, you just when that thing breaches the water and it comes at you, it just feels more real than if you just did it all digitally. So yeah, and I think if the shark is successful, it's probably because we went all out and really built the thing. It's a real object.
It's very effective, I must say. So well done on that. Tell me about the logistics of filming, location, and of course, it was shot in a tank or something like that. How did all of that work?
Well, we had originally conceived of this to be shot in a giant tank outdoors in Malta. It's like an infinity tank, the one that they shot Gladiator in.
Ah,
And we actually started pre-production over in Malta. We were going to shoot all the tank stuff there. Um, but unfortunately, Spielberg swooped in and sort of grabbed all the tanks for the new Jurassic World movie. And so, we were told, well, look, you can have the tank, but you have to wait till next year. And we were like, no, we're not going to do that. We're shooting this now. So we came home and we realized we were going to have to shoot it indoors in a studio in Australia, up in Queensland. And there just wasn't an indoor tank big enough to hold our vision. And so we had to build our own tank. And so we built, all of the indoor tanks in Australia, they're kind of 25 meters in circumference. And like I needed 40 meters of tank, basically. So we built a 40-meter tank with nearly 2 million liters of water in it, which is a very difficult thing when you're, working on an indie budget. Like the only way I could figure to make this work in a studio context was, instead of trying to make it look real, like we were going to do in the giant outdoor infinity tank in Malta, it was going to look really gritty and very real. You were going to constantly see the background of the ocean, and it was going to, it was going to look more like Jaws. We decided to lean into the studio aspect of things and just fill the studio with fog, lock them in a fog bank so they're effectively stuck in a single location. You can't see more than about 6 or 7 meters in front of you, so that's a perfect setup for a horror film. It becomes Hound of the Baskervilles with a shark instead of a wolf or dog, and it just turns into this gothic nightmare. The problem with that is it can get claustrophobic and visually boring. So we decided to sort of shoot the thing more like how Francis Coppola shot Dracula back in the late 90s, very inspired by early silent films like Murnau's Sunset or Nosferatu, and just go for a really saturated, colorful, hyper-stylized palette. And so the audience didn't get bored. We made sure that, every scene had its own lighting sort of mood board. So, we'd start off with these, deep, dark blue kind of twilight colors, and then we'd move into these majestical pink sunrises, and then into sort of blood red or Kurosawa orange sunsets. And at night, we had the idea of putting bioluminescence in the water. So you've got this sort of neon green glow that lights up the night like a science fiction film. So it looks like some kind of bizarre steampunk sci-fi movie, at night. And so hopefully the palette, and those choices will, make sure that, people don't get bored.
Oh, look, it looks great, and you really the audience is immersed in the situation, in the story, in the characters, and so on. So, all very effective. Um, what made you decide to call the film Beast of War?
Um, I just couldn't think of a better title. Um, there's a movie from the 80s directed by Kevin Reynolds about a tank in Afghanistan, Russians fighting Afghani soldiers. It's called The Beast of War. It's one of my favorite films.
Ah,
Not many people know about it though, and so I
yeah.
was inspired by that. The reference to Beast of War, I know, is in some poems. I've seen it, out there. So it's kind of the idea of the beast of war, the beast in all of us. And war itself is a violent beast. And also, when humans go through the act of war, they must become a beast themselves. So there were nice metaphors I found, and also a giant killer man-eating shark is a beast itself, and so it just felt like the right title. That was just a working title. I was just like, oh, we'll call it Beast of War, and then we'll change it later on. But I just couldn't think of a better name. And because there's like a million shark films, like all of the sharky titles are already taken. So I kind of just went with this one in the end and just, went with the working title.
Okay, no, that's fair enough. I understand. Tell me about you've talked about the look of the film, all of that works, about the music and also the editing process, because it's very sharply edited, I thought.
Yeah, the music was a funny one. We had somebody lined up, and then they kind of it sort of had to drop out at the last minute. So we rushed around trying to find a composer, and I was sort of freaking out, going, "You can't rush cast this kind of music." It was a very specific thing that we were after, and we've found Francois Tétaz, and he had done Wolf Creek and all sorts of fantastic horror films. He's a brilliant composer, and luckily he just had a hole in his schedule exactly when we needed him, and so he came on very quickly and just locked into what I needed very quickly, and I really love his score because in the training sequences, you've got this classic, almost David Lean, old school kind of. It's almost like an Archer's score, like a Michael Powell kind of score, So it feels very Lawrence of Arabia-y, or Bridge Over the River Kwai.
Mm.
And then, once they go into the ocean, into the nightmare, it becomes a little bit more distorted and modern and a little bit more kind of Snowtown-esque, with those sort of rhythmic circular pounding, screeching
Mm.
kind of sounds. But he also connected into the beauty, when they're sort of looking at the bioluminescence and seeing, these beautiful colors and uh, all of that. There's a bit of beauty to the score too, and then later on when they're attacked by the Japanese again, he comes back into this really interesting Kurosawa influenced uh, kind of classic old school action score. And so there's so many layers to it. And, even in the end, there's this wonderful end sequence where it comes in with the military drums and it almost seems a little bit like Saving Private Ryan. It's just quite emotional. So the score is just so much better than we have any right for it to be, considering how little time Frank had to work on it. I think he did such a good job.
Mm.
The editing was interesting. I co-edit my film, so me and Reg Squarco, my co-editor, sat down and just edited the crap out of it, and we were very happy with what we got, and it tested very well. Um, but there was just something missing, and there was something missing in the test audiences. Everybody was like, this is good, but I want more than good." We didn't. There wasn't something we hadn't nailed. Um, and so we brought in an editor. His name's Steve Evans, and he's a bit of a legend in the Australian industry as an editor. He's done so many films. He cut Chopper and Baby Teeth and all sorts of stuff. He's very talented. And he and I sat down and did a pass where we really talked about cutting it as sort of almost like it's one long poetic phrase, and each phrase or word would lead into the next word, like it feels when you're reading one of those old poems like Rime of the Ancient Mariner or something. We really wanted to turn it into a tone poem, and so we really worked on actually cutting a lot of the dialogue out and taking it from 90 whatever minutes it was down to, like, I think it was like 80 87 minutes in the end. We really condensed it into this sort of flowing uh, um, yeah, I wanted it to have a dream flow. I wanted, once they kind of hit the water and, they're into this living nightmare, I just wanted it to feel like a delirium, like these guys are dying of thirst and dying of hunger, and their brains are not connecting into reality properly. And I wanted to get into their headspace of, this weird sort of nightmare flow that they're in. And we really concentrated on the lead character of Leo in that second editing pass, and just really tried to tell it from his perspective emotionally, and psychologically. And once I finished that pass with Steve, I felt confident enough to put inspired by true events at the start of the film. I hadn't done that originally because I didn't feel like it was appropriate. But like once I saw that edit, and I was like, I think we've earned this. I think psychologically, I think we've presented something that connects into somewhat something of what some of those guys would have gone through in that hellish real scenario. And I just felt, once I saw that cut, I was like, yeah, let's just do it. Let's put inspired by real events at the start, and take this seriously.
Yep, all fair enough. That all sounds great. Um, uh, Apart from releasing in Australia, I gather the film will be releasing internationally in America and other places because I think it will have international traction.
Yeah, I mean, it's being released in America. I think we're releasing in Australia October 9. They're releasing over there October 10, theatrically. So it'll be on screens for a period of time. And with these things, you just put it out there, and like, this is an indie film. We're not going to have like a huge marketing budget. A lot of this is like reliant on word of mouth and reviews, and it's great to interviewers like yourself are really helping to push this out there, and it's either going to connect in a big way, or it'll probably just go to streaming. I don't know. It's not a part of the process that I can control, and all you can do is just do your best and hope that the audiences come. But the one thing I do know is, having seen this now on a giant screen at the Melbourne International Film Festival, I know it works with audiences, and it's a massively fun ride. You always get quite nervous as a filmmaker. Is it going to work in a crowded context? And it was just great. Like, as soon as it came up, within 6 minutes, I'm just like, oh, they're with it. Like, they're connected in, and they laughed and groaned and moaned and screamed and cried in all the right places, and yeah, it was pretty satisfying to watch it with an audience. So, I know if they come, they will be very entertained. So, yeah, fingers crossed. It hits a bit of a zeitgeisty thing, and it makes a bit of cash, because not to be rude or gauche or whatever, but like, if these films make money, then we get more of them. If they don't, then we get less of them. And
Yeah.
it was really important for me to tell an Australian story, from Australian history, and this is one of the first, like, this has an Indigenous action hero in a way that I've not seen in too many films, and it really would mean a lot to me if this connects on a global scale. It'd be great to be able to get this story out to as many eyes as I can.
I'm sure it will work very well indeed. I think it's very effective. Well, Kia, great talking to you. I just want to finish by asking you I suppose, a standard question. Have you got another film or project lined up?
Yeah, actually, me and Blake Northfield are going to dive into World War II again. I just loved writing this so much, and there was something about a war film that I really enjoyed. And so, yeah, this one's going to be set on the Eastern Front, and it's got snipers and British troops and a female, it's sort of loosely based on one of the most successful female Russian snipers of all time. It's got Nazis, it's got everything. So I'm, I'm really looking forward to jumping back into that world, Peter. So hopefully we're going to start shooting that in January of next year. So that's coming up.
Okay, well, good luck with that, and probably not with a shark in it as a major character.
No more sharks. I'm done. No, no, no more water tanks for me. I'm just like, no, 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 please, please. I need solid ground on this
In
one.
solid ground, yeah. Although I was
Yeah.
just visualizing sharks eating Nazis, that could work really well. But anyway, that's another story.
Yeah, I'm all up for that. I'll watch that movie. I don't know if I'll direct it. I think if I saw another water tank, I don't need to see another water tank in my lifetime, really. Yeah.
Fair enough. I fully understand. Look, congratulations on the film Beast of War. We've been speaking to the writer-director of the film, Kiah Roache-Turner. Kiah, thank you so much for talking with me.
Thanks so much, Peter. Always good to chat to you.
Okay, all the best.
All right, see you, mate.
Bye.